All right, welcome to another episode of Comic Book Squares. We just want to remind everybody about our big contest for 2023. We're going to help find a new writer in comic books. We're partnered with Dream Foundry on this, and just remember the deadline is the end of September to get your stories in. So to kick the show off, my name's Shane.
I'm Paul.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Mike. Let's get this show started.
All right, everybody. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Comic Book Squares. We're really excited today. We got David Howard. He's a creator of OPSEC, which is out with ASAP Imagination. And we're going to talk about that and a few other things. But David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your projects and what do you got going on in the comics world?
Sure. So yeah, my name's Dave Howard, David Howard, aka Nem. I got any other nicknames out there, and I'm sure we can get into that as well. But yeah, I'm a writer of various projects. I guess first off, a little bit about me. I live here in Southern California, in Riverside, which is funny because we're recording on Riverside. So I live in the city of Riverside. And yeah, and I am a comic book writer for ASAP Imagination on the Our World, set of books there. And I write OPSEC for them, and I'm going to be coming on to another title as well, writing for them as well. That hasn't been announced yet, so I won't announce that because Hades, who's been on here before, will kill me.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to want to Tom Holland things and tell things, before they're out there, so I've gotten better at that. Then I also have my own company, my own publishing company called Ryneshard Press out here in Riverside. And, we could talk a little bit about that. We have our Blood World title that we're working on. And we had a little bit of a setback with our initial crowdfunding campaign for that, but we're still moving forward. And Ryneshard is actually named after the city of Riverside. Our symbol is based on the city of Riverside here. And then I also write novels. I write novels and short stories and things like that. So I've got several publications out there. Most recently, my novel, The Long Game, was published by Any One World from ASAP Imagination. And that's a paranormal mystery thriller with some horror elements in there. And I love to write horror stories. I'm actually on a horror podcast where we talk about movies and things like that. So that's a big passion of mine. And I like to write short stories and poetry and things like that. And I've had some publications with that, but that's what's going on right now with me. And I've got another novel that I'm in the works right now, and we're doing a number of different things that we could get into. As far as me personally, I have a family. I have a wife and 3 children. My oldest son just bought his own house and moved out. So that was a big, milestone for our family. Yeah. And I've got a son and 2 daughters, and my youngest daughter is about to go to prom and graduate. And then I've got another daughter who's going to be coming out of a high school, so I've got one who's an artist, one who's an electrical engineer, and then the youngest wants to be a chef. So that's going on. And then my wife and I have been married for 26 years.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we live here. And I was originally trained as a computer scientist. I graduated from West Point for the United States Military Academy. So I was an Army officer. And I did that for a while. Then I did computers for a long time in a various number of industries. And then I have some health issues, so I became disabled. But that allowed me to start the next chapter of my life, which was writing. And eventually I got into writing and everything, So that is the 51 years of my life summed up real quick. So, there's a whole lot of other stuff, but, I don't want to bore everyone with the minutia. But, that's basically where I'm at. So, yeah, I'm a computer scientist by trade, but a writer by heart, so.
Well, I guess we don't need to do the rest of the interview. So thanks very much, David.
Good night, everyone. Good luck.
Good night. That was the best interview we've ever done.
That's the best elevator pitch I've ever heard. That was awesome. If you don't mind, I'm going to first start off by saying thank you for your service for our country and for our freedoms. I appreciate you making those sacrifices for us, for country. So thank you for that. And you actually kind of touched on some things that we like to talk about here at Comic Book Squares, which is, kind of how you get to the point where you are with being in this industry and creating things. And so you had mentioned a disability that kind of maybe forced you or turned you into this direction. So a lot of times we talk with creators that they've been doing it since they were small children, even in school and things like that. So did you personally kind of start like writing or drawing or kind of being interested in telling stories at a young age, and then you kind of came back around to that? Or what, did you actually kind of develop that skill and that passion later in life?
Sure. I have been a writer since I was very young. My mom always made me fill out these horrible books, every year before you go to school, where it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's like there were a number of things in there. My dad was a fireman, so fireman was always in there, and sailor or things like that. But writer was always there. And I actually wrote my first horror story, believe it or not, when I was 8 years old. So, I was a troubled child. I actually won an award for that. It got published in our school district.
Wow.
But I've always wanted to be a writer. I was always writing things. And like Twilight Zone and Rod Serling was a huge favorite of mine growing up as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
But I wanted to go into the military, and that was a big thing for me. And I went in the military. And then after I got out, it was that old thing where it's like, you have to get a real job, so it's like, I had to get a real job and do real things. So I was in computers, and I liked that, but writing was always the closest thing to my heart. So I was writing this whole time, behind the scenes. And I told people a number of times, I've actually written 12 novels and thrown them away over the years because I didn't think they were good enough. Yeah. And,
dang.
Lori Cunningham from ASAP Imagination is intent on finding. I used to write fan fiction, so I would go on and write fan fiction to get it published. And there's a whole series of, I can't believe I'm going to admit this again on camera, Harry Potter romance fan fiction that I wrote as a dare.
Oh.
And people loved it, and it's still out there today. My daughter's actually found it, and I never hear the end of it. So,
My gosh.
yeah, and that was from years ago, and so Lori is begging me to tell her where it is, and I refuse. So I was always doing all of this writing behind the scenes, and it was a real passion. And my wife, to her credit, was always saying, if you're not happy doing the 9 to 5 and being in traffic all the time, it's like, we'll be okay. Go be a writer. And I was just like, no. I was doing the man thing. I was like, no, I gotta have a real job, and I gotta bring in this stuff and do all that. And then I became disabled, and it was a very dark time in my life. For men, I think everybody, but for men in particular, when you can't provide and stuff, it's very hard. And luckily, I found Comic Crusaders, which is a website, and I started doing reviews for them and everything. And that led me to meet Paul Hayden, who just out of, he had seen the stuff I had done behind the scenes. He's like, hey, would you like to write a comic book for me? And I said, yeah.
Nice.
And I started doing that. And then there are a couple people, Paul's one, Al Mega from Comic Crusaders, another, who are like, I had started writing this book that is out now, and they're like, you need to publish this. I was like, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And then my wife was like, you need to publish this. I was like, no. And then they were like, you need to do it. And so I did it. And then as I built my confidence up, it was like, you know what, I could do this. It was like a transformation, and I blossomed again. So it's like I hit rock bottom with the disability and wasn't doing anything. And then writing and these people that I met through writing and through the comics industry brought me back to life. I mean, that's the best way I could describe it, and so here I am now, still with medical issues. I mean, I'll be honest with you, and please, nobody feel sorry for me. I'm sitting here, I'm in pain. It hurts, but I've got a mission, it's the best way I could describe it. And so I'm doing this, and so all the other things can be put aside because I have found my place in life again, so it's like a second birth. It really is. And it's wonderful. So.
That's amazing.
It's weird that you said second birth, DW, because I was just going to call you another nickname might be Phoenix, right? Where it's just kind of like you get to a point where you just feel like you're born again, like this is what I was really meant to do. And it sounds like you can hear the passion in your voice when you talk about writing and going back to that. And so quick question. So do you still have, or do you remember the details of that 8-year-old self with that first mystery story that you wrote?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, out here, I'm of Native American, a mixed ancestry, but part of me is Native American. And so I was always interested in that. And growing up out here, there is a peak called Tockwitz Peak. And there's a whole story about that. And Tockwitz was supposed to be an evil shaman, an evil spirit. And there's actually a rock up on these mountains that looks like a face staring down at you because of the formations in the rock and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I wrote this whole story, and it was about two kids that find an old journal from the Old West out there about these settlers that came to Tockwitz Peak, about how all these misfortunes came upon them, and and the curse of Tockwitz and stuff like that. And they're reading it, and as they get done, they put the journal away and go down. As they're walking out the door, a butcher's knife comes floating up and goes after them, and that's the end of the story. So,
Oh my God!
Yeah,
And you did this when you were 8. This sounds like something I'd watch right now. Like, where's Netflix with this thing?
yeah, I wrote that when I was 8 years old. So, yeah.
Oh my
That's
gosh!
awesome.
Yeah. So, it's like, and I'm looking back on it now. I'm like, I was wondering, what did the people who read this think of my parents? So it's like, what is wrong with this kid? But I was always into those types. I was always into fantasy. I love reading fantasy. My mom and dad were really into getting me into reading early. People look at me like I was a little bit of a freak, but I was reading Tolkien and Iliad and Odyssey and everything when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, stuff like that, and really into all of those things. And so I love fantasy, but I was also reading Arthur Conan Doyle and Poe, and that was a big influence on me, especially like The Telltale Heart. For some reason, I still remember when I read that for the first time. I was in like 2nd or 3rd grade, and I was like, wow, I love this. So, Edgar Allan Poe. And then I ended up going to West Point just like him, so it's like,
yeah. Well, I was going to
a little bit of influence there.
And I was going to ask about the horror, because as a kid myself, I also wrote a lot of horror stories. And I feel like part of it for me was I didn't know the word when I was, 8 years old, but it was, cathartic, because I was scared. Like my mom had left out like Stephen King books, or Twilight Zone was on the TV in the afternoons. And, I remember sneaking and watching those, or seeing Nightmare on Elm Street on the TV. So then in turn, to get over those fears, I would write horror stories, to kind of like take control of it. Do you find like, for you with the horror, is it more like you really enjoy it, or is it like also, do you have your own fears that you're facing with some of those?
It's both. Yeah. I really love to write. Well, first of all, I love it when I write stuff and it scares people, So it's like my editor on my book, when they would write and they give me notes back, and when I would get a note back like, holy blank, 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 I can't sleep tonight after this. I was like, yeah. So
did my job.
Yes. But at the same time, I write about the stuff that scares me. I mean, it's perfectly honest. In fact, a lot of my ideas come from nightmares. So I remember my nightmares and dreams. I end up writing them down. So a lot of the stuff, if you read it, that is horror for me, short stories and things like that, is something that I actually lived in a nightmare or something, And then there are certain topics that I just think are fascinating to write about. I love to write about, some people like to write about monsters and things like that. I like to write about evil kids, clowns, evil dolls, ghosts, demons, those types of things. I like those types of things and exploring those, because those are the things that scare me. But those are the things that I like watching too. Like I'll watch stuff on TV, documentaries or well, not documentaries. I don't even know. They're not true. Half the stuff is just made up BS. Let's be honest about it. But, I like watching it. One of my favorite movies, which I think is just a classic, is The Fallen, starring Denzel Washington.
Yes.
Yes. So,
Time is on my side.
Yeah. And
Sing
to
it, man.
me, that is
Yeah.
scarier than any, not to take away from slasher movies, because I've got some friends that love those, but to me, that kind of thing is scarier than anything. When John Goodman is possessed, I'm like, oh my God, so.
Oh, I haven't talked about that movie in a long. That was a great movie.
Yeah.
That last scene, man, got me.
Yeah.
I mean, we could say spoilers because it's been a long time. You don't watch Fallen yet. That's on you. That's on you.
Exactly. Another one I love, 1408, starring John Cusack.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Sam Jackson too, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I saw that one.
Oh,
1408.
Another one that ruins the song for you, So just like Fallen ruined that song, you will never be able to listen to We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters ever again without being creeped out. So I will tell you right now, every time I hear that song now, I start looking over my shoulder. So.
Oh, man. No, that's horror's like, I have this like love-hate relationship with it, right? Where it's because it does scare me. I'm a big weenie when it comes to horror often, but then it's also like I don't know, like you can't take your eyes away, or you're just my girlfriend gets mad because I usually end up my coping mechanism is laughter. So we go see horror movies at the theater, and I'm the one guy laughing because I'm trying to cope. So do you find? So that brings up the question with writing horror and incorporating horror into some of your other things. Do you find it good do you try to inject any comedy, like levity, to help break the tension here and there, or do you find like it's full bore, serious?
It really depends on what I'm writing, but it depends on the mood. But I'm a naturally snarky / sarcastic person myself, so I love to put that in there at times when it fits. Or even just moments of human emotion, human actual just talking. Because if it's nonstop, I find when I write, if it's just nonstop scary, nonstop thriller type thing, and you don't take a moment to slow down, when you're doing this, like that, people become immune to it. Right. It's like it stops having its effect. So giving those little breaks in there really helps. I found the same thing with the novel. There were moments where you have to have those little moments of sarcasm and things like that, because that's how people would actually react, and talk. And like you said, laughing, it helps break that tension, so that the next moment when the crying comes in, it's even more impactful, because when you get people on that emotional roller coaster, they tend to really latch on to what you're doing. So
I was going to say, I think it's an right? They're more engaged with that. Whereas if you're just trying to peak it at all times, like you said, they get a little desensitized to that, to that story. So that makes a lot of sense.
Like for instance, OPSEC, one of the characters that most people love, there's an evil little doll in there, but she's the sidekick of somebody else. People love that character, and she's snarky and she is violent. But she is also kind of the comic relief. Her and her handler, Barbie, Barbara, and so the two of them, kind of give you a break and let you enjoy the things. So one of my favorite things from the first issue is she's fighting this monster, and she bites into it. But as she's like latched onto this huge creature, she's like, "What's that smell?" And she's like, "Oh, you taste disgusting," type thing, So it's like, so this evil little doll with shark teeth, but you're like laughing at her. So.
So
awesome.
I was going to ask you, DW, do you? It sounds like you're with this passion that you have kind of immersed yourself in. Sounds like you've written a lot of material, because you were talking about those novels that perhaps never get published, or that you feel aren't good enough, or that you maybe start and then move on to something else. Like, it sounds like you've always got a lot going on. How do you maybe you can help other creators or writers? Like, how do you organize that? How do you like write from a story from like beginning to end, no matter if that's 12 comics or a graphic novel or an actual just novel, or like how do you approach some of that writing that you do?
Yeah, first I take lots of notes, either mental notes or actual physical, well, not physical, but notes on the computer and things like that. I'm also one of those people, it depends on what I'm writing, but I love to write lots of background on things.
Yeah.
So, for instance, Blood World, which is Rain Cross Press, that started off as an idea for a novel, and that ballooned into a whole other thing. But as I was getting ready to write the novel, I was like, this is my setting. Taking after Tolkien, I sat down and wrote about 100 pages of history for the world.
Wow.
And then wrote out all the technology and how that works and everything else. And it just so happens that friends of mine were talking to me about the project, and they were like, hey, I went on in on this. I think this is a great world, and that's how that ballooned. But even for OPSEC, which is a comic series, I sat down, and before I wrote everything, I started writing. I wrote several short stories about the characters and their origin. And those, ASAP has got those in their pocket, and we may publish those eventually. But I wrote that. I wrote all of their power sets. I wrote up their biographies and their histories. So I have that all in my mind, so that it's just there, so that it's accessible to me to know when I'm writing, this is how they would react because this is what's in their past. So even if the reader doesn't know that, they may know that eventually. But I've got that. Versus there are times when I'll sit down to write a short story, and I just write it. I just start writing and write. Start to finish. As far as novel, I will say when you write a novel, I started off trying to write chapter 1 to the last chapter, just like that. I ended up finding that I ended up writing it like a series of scenes sometimes. So I would go and I was like, I'm in this mood, I need to write this scene right now, and I'd write that and then putting it together. And but that's much more difficult because of the planning, because there's so many different threads you have to keep together. And there were a couple times where I wrote myself into a hole, and then you're sitting there going, how do I fix this? And it's like, and I think that was a hard part because I ended up having to rip stuff up and going, this doesn't work. I got to do something else. So,
yeah.
Right. So kind of, sorry, Ben, real quick. I just had a follow up off of that. So, so it sounds like, again, thank you for that, Nem, for explaining that, because it sounds like you kind of approach it sometimes a little different depending upon what the end result is going to be, like a comic versus a novel and things like that. So kind of a follow-up question to that then, do you find yourself having a different process when it comes to, like you're talking about writing background and then writing technology? Do you ask for input, like from your wife or from any of your kids or anybody else on the creative team, or do you just want to get it finished and then kind of present all of it? Like how do you get that feedback, or you're like, I've got this, right?
Oh yeah, I ask for feedback a lot of times or ideas. One of the worst phrases my wife has, can hear is, do you have a second to look at this? And it's like, oh no, but no, I mean, she helps me. I bounce ideas off of her. A lot of times when I'm writing the history, like my son or my kids, I'll be like, hey, can you read this? And they'll read it and they'll give feedback for that. And I love getting that feedback, getting people's, what they think. Like one particular instance is I came up with a name for a conflict in the history of Blood World. And my son was reading. He's like, that name doesn't sound right. It sounds really hokey. It's kind of cringe. So I was like, yeah, you're right. I'll change that, So, but doing that and just seeing, because a lot of times one of the things I found, especially in the editing process, not only of the novels, but the comic books and things, is that what sounds great in my head and on paper when I write it, when other people are reading it, they don't interpret it the same way, and it's like, it's one of those things that I'm kind of blessed that I don't have a lot of ego. I have my own, I do have some, I have to admit, but I don't, when it comes to constructive criticism, a lot of times I'm like, what, that makes sense. Let's do that, because, as much as I want to say, no, that's my vision or that's what I wrote and it's fine. If the reader doesn't get it, then it doesn't make any difference at all, So it's like I've come to really enjoy the editing process because that helps, For instance, in the novel, I had to go back and rewrite this thing because, as you could tell, I'm a man. So I was writing about a female medical issue, and I thought this was a huge revelation. All of this can happen. And my editor was a female, and she was like, and the women there were talking about it with this big revelation. She's like, every woman knows about that. So then I went to my wife, and she's like, well, I kind of know about that. I was like, well, then I got to kind of change how everybody's reacting to it because it was a revelation to me. But so it's like, and those are the little things. It's like you got to eat a little bit of humble pie and go, I thought this was a really cool idea, and now I got to rework it. So
right.
Oh man, that's all. It was funny. You were talking about like having the backstories and 100 pages on the backstory of this world or whatever. And I'm like, one day you could put, because you said you were reading Tolkien since a kid, you could put together your own Silmarillion. Have the David Howard universe Silmarillion.
I would love to do that. With Blood World. I mean, we just got to get this thing off the ground. But one of my other projects right now, like I said, I'm actually writing 2 novels right now. I'm writing the follow-up to The Long Game, which is out. And then I'm writing a novel in the Blood World universe, which is what it was originally supposed to be. But I'm a big fan of Warhammer 40K, and they've got this thing called Black Library, where people could come in and write their own stories in the Warhammer universe. And that's one of the things I want to do is to anybody out there who is an aspiring writer, is a young writer, and wants to get, a title under their belts, I want to offer my universe to them, my background, and say, go write a story within this and we'll publish it for you, and put it out there.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and it'll give you a credit. It gives you a leg up. And to be honest, it helps us. It builds our lore as well, but, I want to do that for young writers and help them do stuff like that as well. So.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of Blood World, and earlier, you had mentioned that you had a setback with that, and if you don't mind, I think it would be helpful because a lot of times, people hear about successes, right? And like, oh yeah, this thing happened, blah blah blah. But I think it's also important for folks to hear about setbacks and how you work to overcome those. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what the setback and kind of how you overcame or are working to overcome that? And
sure. So yeah, we decided to crowdfund and be perfectly honest. Raincross was originally going to be an imprint for me to self-publish books, and then I found a publisher and everything. And but Blood World had come around, and other people were interested, and it ended up becoming a graphic format. It was going to be a graphic. It's going to be a graphic magazine in the sense of like a 2000 AD or heavy metal type thing. And so we were going to do that, and I have other writers who have written scripts, and I've got lots of stories. And but the problem is that art is very expensive, so and you got to pay your artist,
right?
And I'm not made of money yet, so I had managed to raise some funds and had saved some funds for my own writing, and so I got some art together, and we were going to crowdfund. But the problem is getting eyes on your project and advertising all that is very difficult. And so our campaign just ended and we didn't fund, and that is very difficult to deal with, because you're like, we got this great idea. Why is no one supporting us, But I reached out to some people and talked to them, and it's like, I made mistakes. This is my first time. I'm a new company and a new project, and we're learning. There's some things that we could do better. I also think that, we need to have more of the book done. I learned some things about the psychology of how people buy things. And so, it's like I really step back from that, and I'm learning stuff all the time. And so I'm now looking for different sources of funding. I'm looking for what else I can provide, because I thought that if I provided people with unfinished pages, artwork, it would help. It seems that a lot of people like to see the finished pages with the words and everything on it. So it's like, I need to do some of that. But, I'm also going a more traditional route. I'm looking for business loans to see if I can get the book finished, because if people know you have a finished book, that helps as well. But it's always that learning process. It's stepping back. Maybe I'll break the book into smaller single issue floppies at first. So instead of you buying a 100-page book, you buying a 22-page book at first, and it's more affordable and things like that. But it's always this process where it's a step back, and you're going to feel, I'll be honest with you, you're going to feel down. I did feel depressed and defeated for a while. And then there's a choice to make. It's like, do you either let that dominate your life, or do you get back up and say, okay, I made mistakes. I need to put my ego to the side again and learn from those and see how I can tackle the problem from a different direction, or what I could do, and it's scary. And I'll be honest with you, if it wasn't for the people in my life who support me and listen to me and let me vent and get that out of my, head and out of my heart for a while, it would be much more difficult, so you got to have those people to lean on, but I'm lucky that I have those people, and I've got the support of my wife, has been very supportive. And so it's like, now it's just a question of how do I solve this problem? How do I get around it? What can I do? And so as far as artwork is going, what we're going to do is we're looking at some traditional funding methods. So I'm looking at getting some loans or something like that. And that's its own problem, because you're like, man, I'm really taking a bet on myself and my ideas. But it's like, if I don't believe in myself, why should anybody else believe in me? So,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting again, DW, that we hear different people kind of challenged with the same types of setbacks or hurdles that they're trying to get over. And we've had other creators on here that have talked about offering, sometimes it's free digital content on their websites. Some people are doing that and trying to just give, like you're saying, some of that background, or just kind of starting the story with a chapter or two, and for that in a digital format. We've talked to creators that are, trying to hit the local circuit, maybe their local comic book shops or bookstores or conventions and things like that. So it is, sometimes you make a very good point, where I'm sure at some point there is that feeling that, maybe you're not good enough, but I don't think it's that at all. We've had some incredibly talented folks like yourself on this show, and we're just this tiny, tiny little fractional piece of it.
Right.
And there's so much talent out there. I think you nailed it when you're just like, how do I get people to view this, or how do I get people to see this? Because sometimes, like you said, they're a little desensitized by all the amount of stuff that's out there at times. So it's, how do you drive people to your product, to your creation?
Yeah.
So,
and I think a lot of it is doing shows like this, but it's also and getting out there and just little by little, and it's a lot of hustle. It really is. It's that old saying. It's like, where you got to hustle. And my old swim coach used to tell me that success in swimming, was 1% athletic talent and 99% perspiration. And it really is. I think that's probably the secret to life as well, or at least this type of thing. And part of it is luck. To be perfectly honest with it, and that's kind of hard to accept, but it's like, what? And so you always have dreams of making it huge, and I would love to make it big, but for every person that reads my stuff and enjoys it, you got to take those successes and enjoy that, and then if you do break out and become huge, then hey, great. So,
well, have you gotten to hear feedback from people like about your stories? Like, what's some cool things you've heard about some of your work from fans?
I have. It's one of the things that I'm living for, and I'll just put this out there, is I would love to see eventually somebody cosplay one of my characters. That would be amazing to me. Yeah. But like I said, like Maisie, when people talk, she has become kind of Maisie is the evil doll in OPSEC, and she's become kind of a celebrity under herself to the people who read her. So it's kind of an underground thing. I can't say that it's huge, but everybody loves Maisie. So the minute you talk about Maisie, I don't know what that says about society, but people love the evil doll. So that gets out there. But it's the same way with I had somebody I know who is an English professor write the foreword to the long game. And so they read the long game, and then other friends of mine had beta read it. And then some people that I know bought the book and they read it, and then as they read it, the feedback I got from them about, how quick it reads and how emotionally invested they got in certain characters really hits me right in the feels,
Yeah.
Especially since people are picking up on some of the things that I was trying to put in there, and you don't want to beat people over the head with it, but when they get it, it's very satisfying, gratifying. For instance, in the long game, there's one character who is a favorite of mine. I love her to death, and one of the hardest problems was at a certain point in the story, it was time for her to die, and I didn't want to kill her. I really didn't want to kill her. I put off writing that for a long time.
Oh man!
And when I did kill her, be perfectly honest with you, I cried. I was that upset. It was very emotional. And people picked up on that. They picked up on how deep that death was, and they're, and my wife was a great, you talk about talking to people. I went back and forth with this for a while, and I was talking to my wife about it. I was like, I don't want to kill her. She's like, does it need to happen in the story? I was like, yeah. She's like, then you got to do it. You got to do it, And so I did, and it served the story, But that's kind of how attached. I don't think that I'm unique, but for me personally, I can't speak for other writers. That's how kind of attached I get to characters sometimes, So
yeah. You're not George R. Martin, who's just like willy-nilly murdering everybody.
Yeah, exactly. By the masses.
Yeah. Sean Bean. Yeah. Well, that character's gonna die. So
Yeah. I hope you like this guy because I'm killing him the next season.
Yeah, exactly.
So Nev, do you find that sometimes when you do get that satisfaction and that feedback and that just like you said, when it really gets you in the feels, does that then kind of signal that maybe at some point you would want to have almost like a prelude story or some kind of an offshoot where you're like, I love this character so much, maybe I can talk to maybe how she got up to that point. Granted, the story was ultimately that ended in her death, or even Maisie or other characters that maybe you're like, it'd be cool to do like a little spin-off story or just have a little tangent side story about their life. Does that ever cross your mind?
It does. It depends on the character. For instance, with the character I killed in the long game, there is a whole prelude to that I could write about a serial killer case that they worked on called the Clockwork Killer, which comes up in the long game. And I have had a number of people who have read the book who have asked me when I'm going to write the book about the Clockwork Killer case.
Nice.
That's awesome.
And so I mean that would be very interesting, and this particular character, she figures in that as well. She's just a really cool character, and she is one of three detectives. So. The three detectives, I won't tell you who dies, but there's only two females. The lead character is Detective Michael Domenicali. He's an NYPD homicide lieutenant. And then there's Detective Sergeant Renee Murdoch and Detective Sergeant Delia Sanchez. So those three characters are kind of central, but there are other characters. And the two survivors feature in the next book, and Domenicali will feature in all seven. There's 7 planned books in that series. So.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
But then, it depends on the character. Like with Maisie, like I said, the origin story of Maisie and Barbara, I wrote that as a short story, and that's out there, Barbara's story and then Maisie's story probably would be interesting, but it's the same thing with the two central OPSEC agents. So OPSEC is a government agency. So there are 2 agents that feature. So I have stories for them as well. And So it's like I do like to write those types of things. Same thing with Blood World. I wrote a short story that kind of gives you a little glimpse of what was happening on Earth a couple hundred years before Blood World takes place. So those types of things. So yeah, to answer your question, that was a long way of me saying yes. I do consider it. Sometimes the character before these things happen is just kind of boring. So you're like, I don't know how interesting that would be. So
Right.
yeah, it really depends.
Hey, so sorry, we're before we head off here, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where to go and find your books, where to find the comics. We'll learn more about all your projects going on.
Sure. So if you go to raincrosspress.com, that is Raincross's main site, and we're going to have more information there on what we're going to do with Blood World and how we're going to move forward from there. OPSEC and the rest of our world is available on asapimagination.com. You go there, and the D.W. Howard collection is on asapimagination.com. So there's a number of books that I've done for them, so you could check that out. And then also, if you go to anyoneworld.com, that's where the long game is on sale right now, so you could go there. And then on social media, I'm at Raincross Press, or so for Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then if you want to actually talk to me personally, I'm a Nemesis FC2 on Instagram and Facebook and on Twitter. And real quick, Nemesis, I'm not a mean person. Nemesis FC was the name of a soccer team I played on a long time ago. So when I created my Twitter handle, we had a guy who our jersey was black with a biohazard symbol on it, and we're like, what are we going to name our team?
Oh.
And some guy was like, I've always wanted to play on a soccer team named Nemesis. And so all these years later, I am Nemesis FD. So,
AKA
awesome.
Nem.
Yes. So
we'll have all those links. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nem.
No. So that's my very not so interesting explanation. Everyone, for a long time, when people would say Nemesis, it's like, oh God, who's this guy I'm going to talk to? I'm like, oh really? I'm a nice guy, I promise.
Well, you talked about Paul Hayden, Hades, that's his moniker, and he's like the nicest, most jovial guy, but then Hades is
Hades.
Yeah, exactly. And he loves it. He loves it. He's like, he doesn't want to be called anything else now. He's like, Paul. It's like, who's Paul? I'm Hades. Okay.
Well, we'll have all those links in the show notes, and in the if you're watching on YouTube, they're in the video description. So please check out all those different links. Mike, did you have any other questions before we headed off?
Nope. I'm good.
All right. Well, hey, thanks again, Nem. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much. This was great. This was a ton of fun. So thank you. And please, everybody, go check it out. Go check out OPSEC and look for Blood World coming again. So,
heck yeah.
Absolutely. Good stuff.
Hey, everybody. Thank you again for joining us on Comic Book Squares. It was awesome having Nem on here. It was just such a great show. We really appreciate you joining us. Don't forget to hit that like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell so we can keep bringing you awesome content like this. And also, please keep an eye out on our channel for more news about our comic script writing contest. That's going to be kicking off here in September. So keep checking back to the show.